Hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're diving back into our series dedicated to the wonderful, weird, wild world of Asian fusion cuisine, with a dish that at one point did actually start out as a viewer request before things just got way out of hand, which is a crispy kimchi prosciutto Brussels sprout. Brussels sprouts, of course, having absolutely no business appearing in any Asian cuisine, really. They do, however, crisp up really nicely over high heat, making them incredibly ideal for glazing and stir-frying. Those following along may know that we have in fact already done a handful of Brussels sprout dishes on this channel, including a Kung Pao Brussels sprout as well as a gochujang glazed Brussels sprout. The kimchi Brussels sprout, however, poses its own inherent complication in that kimchi itself is packed full of water, so if we simply just throw kimchi in with our Brussels sprouts, we're going to end up with a soupy mess. So today we're going to take a closer look at how to navigate this properly with some inspiration from our kimchi fried rice recipe, paired as promised with some fun additions to bring the whole dish together, including a crispy prosciutto as well as a sweet and savory gochujang glaze to round this all off. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so diving right in, we're kicking things off here first with some aromatic veggies to pair with our Brussels sprouts today. We'll be adding all of this to a high heat oven tossed with our Brussels sprouts, so I'm doing my very best to do some knife work to help these veggies cook at a relatively similar rate. Those that have baked veggies in the oven, however, will know that this method poses the inherent problem that you can't stagger cook times as you would with a wok fry. Up first, this is 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of fine minced ginger and half of 1 red onion sliced into strips. If you're like me and you're also tired of trying to figure out the geometry of an onion in order to get an even slice, I've found that splitting the layers up into 2 or 3 at a time helps quite a bit to achieve an even slice. Next up, rounding out our veggies, is our Brussels sprouts. This is 2 pounds worth here, with the root removed and then sliced into quarters. Now, as with any Brussels sprouts dish, this may be the most important step of the entire dish. The stem of the Brussels sprout is the source of its acrid and bitter taste. If you're like me and you were turned off of this veggie as a kid, that's probably what you were tasting. So to solve this, we do want to remove this stem, but we don't want to remove too much of it though, because the stem is the only portion of the Brussels sprout that's holding the whole thing together. If you remove too much, it will fall apart into leaves. So I'm removing just the tip end of the stem here, then slicing into quarters, being very careful to slice through the core of the sprout. If you've done this correctly, you should be left with relatively few errant leaves falling off of your Brussels sprout. Next up, I'm adding my sprouts to my largest mixing bowl along with my garlic, ginger, and onions. Then we're seasoning this with what ended up being about 3 tablespoons of sesame oil and a hefty pinch of kosher salt. We're giving this all a quick toss, then adding to a rimmed baking sheet that has been preheated in a 450-degree F oven, spread evenly across the sheet. I'm baking this for just 10 minutes, then removing, giving a quick toss, and rotating 180 degrees before returning to my oven for an additional 10 minutes. Finally, I'm finishing these off under the broiler for an additional 5 minutes until we're greeted with these wonderfully blistered and crisped up Brussels sprouts, like so. Over on the stove, we're moving on to our prosciutto next. Now, I've got a griddle here to make things a little bit quicker, but you can just as easily do this in a simple skillet. I'm adding my prosciutto to a cold griddle, then bringing the heat up to a medium temperature. The gradual temperature rise here should give our prosciutto plenty of time to render out its fat, yielding these gloriously crispy, crumbly pieces of prosciutto. Back over on the cutting board, we're assembling a quick glaze here next. For those following along with the series, this glaze should look pretty familiar since it's more or less the same glaze that we used in our gochujang glazed Brussels sprouts. This is just 2 tablespoons of soy sauce here to start, followed by a single tablespoon each of rice vinegar and sesame oil. Then, as promised, this is our 2 tablespoons of gochujang, which should pair really nicely with the gochugaru in our kimchi coming up, rounded off finally by our sweet elements. This is 2 tablespoons each of sweet chili sauce and honey going in, then we're mixing this up until a smooth sauce forms and setting aside for a moment while we head over to the stove. Okay, so over on the stove, I have my wok heating up as hot as possible. Then this is 4 tablespoons of peanut oil going in, and as always, long yao for that nice non-stick surface. As I mentioned earlier, perhaps the trickiest obstacle that we'll face today is our kimchi because of its high water content. We'll want to be very careful with this bit because, as you may have guessed, moisture is the enemy of crispiness. So if we just toss this kimchi in with the crispy Brussels sprouts that we just worked so very hard to create, it will turn into a soggy mush. So instead, we're gonna do a quick high heat wok sear to our kimchi for about 2 to 3 minutes, giving it ample opportunity to cook off some of its moisture as well as a bit of its brininess too. Then we're removing this from heat and setting aside for a moment so that we may reduce our glaze next. I'm adding this to a wok over medium-low heat this time, along with about a 1/4 cup of water, really just enough to rinse off the sides of our bowl. I'm letting this all reduce for a solid 5 minutes until a thick and sticky glaze begins to form, then killing the heat, adding my Brussels sprouts and kimchi to the wok and giving this all a toss to combine. Finally, back over on the cutting board, I'm tossing in my crispy prosciutto here as well. I'm not really sure why I didn't just throw this in the wok, but I'm also reserving about a 1/4 cup of this too for garnish. Finally, I'm finishing this all off with a pinch of sesame seed and we're ready to eat. Okay, so I'm just gonna say it, this might be one of my very favorite Brussels sprouts combinations that we have come up with so far. I think the combination of kimchi and Brussels sprouts is a very natural pairing, as is the combination of gochujang and kimchi. It's bright, acidic, sweet, savory, and crispy all at once. Then I think to add to this, our crispy prosciutto is a wonderful addition that really brings the entire dish to life, and I think also adds a nice bit of texture that I feel like a simple crumbled bacon bit would not. I'll also mention that even though this is a very fusion-esque dish, we've actually now touched on a number of very crucial wok cooking techniques here, many of which you will likely see employed in a lot of the recipes on this channel, including how to address excess moisture in a wok fry and how to properly reduce a glaze. Finally, the last bit that I'll mention is that while I do think that the high heat oven and broiler yielded perhaps the most crispy results that I've been able to achieve with a Brussels sprout, I did find that the other veggies that we tossed it in tended to overcook since we didn't really have much control over their cook time. It certainly is a minor detail, but if I could adjust this, I might actually recommend throwing in the garlic, ginger, and onions in with the kimchi and the wok instead, which would have yielded for us a crispier veggie. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. For those who are new to the channel, this one is part of a larger series dedicated to fusion recipes, so definitely check out that series next because there's a lot of these. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice interneters, and I'll see you soon.